I'm sure we'll take late applications when they come from the insightful audience we have here. Of course, we also had work from the Article 29 Working Party. Now, going along with this, there's a piece of work we did on our anonymization code of practice, and we've been reviewing that recently, and we produced a quick guide. Again, this information is all on our website. We've been working very closely with the UK Anonymization Network, which is a team that we were partly responsible for getting together, the Universities of Manchester, the University of Southampton, the Open Data Institute and the ICO working together to come up with some suggestions of how anonymization can work in the circumstances, in what circumstances it can work and in what circumstances it doesn't work. The fundamental principle, Marty, is that the basic data protection principles remain valid, and they're not changed by the technology or by the new techniques, awesome as they are, if you apply good privacy by design, sensible anonymization techniques, and I would say, provided big data stays big. The more you're looking at big trends with big data sets, the safer it is from the point of view of personal information. And then very briefly, at this conference in the private session, the closed session earlier on, we had a very good teach-in on the Internet of Things. And that only makes big data and the challenges even more challenging because of all the very sensitive, very personal information which is picked up by sensors all the time. Yet I remain an optimist. Why am I optimistic about developments in big data? Because the data subjects care. They do care. People said a few years ago that people are careless of their privacy. The research that we've recently undertaken with a research outfit called ComRes, our annual track, shows that people are 85%, I read here, of people are concerned about passing or selling of personal details onto other organizations. 77% concerned about organizations collecting and not keeping personal details secure, and so on. And because these are both consumers and their citizens, on the consumer side, we've seen evidence, we've seen it at this conference, of brands making a virtue of the reassurance to consumers about privacy. The big brands have picked up on the fact that this is consumer behavior to which they have to respond or they lose market share and bottom line. But secondly, it's a citizen concern, and we see how it's playing out politically. In the recent general election in New Zealand, where every major political party had privacy in the shop window. We're seeing the same in the UK as parties get together for the general election next year. It's a very live issue. And to those who still don't get it, either commercial or public sector, I would say, look, the regulator community gets it. And those who say, well, I don't care, I'm doing this because I can, I simply repeat the children's nursery rhyme, don't care was made to care. And how do we make don't care care? Well, effective and proportionate regulatory action, which reinforces that market dynamic. Because as awareness is raised, and we take effective enforcement action, that damages the reputation of those who make the mistakes, and it increases the awareness of the consumers and citizens about these issues. There's a virtuous circle of consumer concern, of an ethical framework, and effective regulation, which I think is going to drive up standards. So I'm optimistic and I'm confident that all the benefits from big data can be exploited, provided they are exploited within this context of understanding that it doesn't change gravity, it doesn't change the basic rules, respect is still needed, but do it right, and the opportunities for good results for all are there to be taken. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chris. This framework that we've created, the foundation, owes a lot to a couple of the papers issued by the Article 29 Working Party this year. One was on compatible purpose, the other was on legitimate interest. And part of the discussion of legitimate interest is the difference between data protection and privacy and the more encompassing nature of data protection as a facilitator of fundamental rights, the complete range of fundamental rights. And with that in mind, I'd like to introduce Mila, and Mila is from the UN, and part of what they're trying to consider at the United Nations is this whole question of controls, but controls that allow them to deal with the fundamental human issues that are out there related to health and welfare and education. And I turn the mic over to Mila.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers of the conference and Martin for organizing this plenary. First, I would like to say a few words about the organization that I work for. UN Global Pulse is a special initiative of the UN Secretary General. So we're within the office of we're within the executive office, and it's been established as an answer to the crisis that erupted in 2009. Tackling with issues in development and also humanitarian context. We're acting as a lab for big data and innovation, tackling issues for development and humanitarian response. We're also exploring best practices within the office on how such data could be used in a privacy protective way. With that, we are, of course, developing robust privacy principles and establishing controls for using big data and ensuring that big data that we get access to is used for public good and not being misused. And as has been discussed in this panel, I think the ethical use for big data, especially claiming that it is being used for public and social good, must be used in a privacy protective way. One of the projects that we are working on, for example, to give you an example, and it's been acknowledged multiple times already during the conference, that big data can indeed be used for public good. The examples of the project is we've been using data for Twitter as an early warning for misinformation about immunization in a particular country in collaboration with UNICEF and also Gates Foundation. We also use mobile phone data, of course anonymized and highly aggregated, to understand population movements before and after the floods, working with WFP, World Food Organization, which would eventually help understanding UN agencies, governments, public sector to understand how to react to the emerging crises and how to act at the time of emergency situations. Of course, with all the great uses of big data, we must acknowledge that harms also needs to be acknowledged and understood and well taken into consideration before every single project. And the colleague mentioned before that harms play a critical role in considering whether you can take the project on and how you're going to perform the project later on. Having said that, it's very important to understand that the big data that you're using and you're claiming and that's being used for public and social good is proportionate to the purpose and is balanced against, of course, the risks that are associated with the use of big data. For example, in the country, one country is exploring medical issues, and one project exploring social conversation around HIV and AIDS could significantly improve health care industry. However, in the same context, but in a different country that actually has laws against that forbids homosexuality and actually punishes it as a crime, this could bring to an unjust persecution of those individuals who could be re-identified. This leads me to another concern, an ethical issue, is the re-identification risk, which have been mentioned also during this conference. There are not enough, as we found, in the public sector, in the global community, enough anonymization standards that would ensure that big data, the linkability issues that are rising around the use of big data, are erased. So there is certainly a huge need for understanding what anonymization standards should be put in place in order to ensure that big data could be used for public good in a privacy-protecting way. For that, I think anonymization technologies, methodologies needs to be developed along with the tools and along with the privacy by design embedded in every process when big data is being used. While there is a need for developing new technologies that would ensure privacy, there is also a need to understand on how to balance privacy and utility. That is to say, to ensure that we can use big data and still get the insights and the value and achieve the purpose which was originally targeted when the big data and the project was taken on. We need to pose a question and understand what are the risks associated if we don't use big data. For example, at the time when we need to respond to disaster, when we need to save human lives. Another question, and of course different levels of anonymization and aggregation, would be posed when you speak of issues that are rising around education or, for example, public transportation. So context and circumstances and risks needs to be always taken into consideration, as we found, when you deal with big data and you claim that you're using it for public good. We also think that there is a need for better awareness. By saying that big data could be used for public and social good, we need to understand that the public should be made aware what risks come with the use of big data and also what the benefits come with the use of big data. That's also a critical aspect of ensuring that public understands, the public sector and various stakeholders on the beneficial uses of big data. Transparency is also the key. Being transparent about the policies and procedures and uses and also possible misuses of big data is also the key to reduce of the lack of awareness and lack of trust. Issues linked to data surveillance are also important because working in the intergovernmental organization, we're frequently being asked of what if the data that you are using on the project could be misused. So increasing transparency and bringing awareness to the public of the beneficial big data uses and also ensuring privacy and data protection techniques in every single project is the key. So finally, I would like to say that it is a challenge, and of course, while it is a challenge, there is still a huge need for an ethical framework to be established, and in particular on a global level. Having different jurisdictions and approaches to big data uses, we do need one approach, and I understand, of course, that there is no one approach that would fit all. However, at Global Pulse, we are trying to work on internal guidelines and internal processes, working on the privacy impact assessment that would consider various norms and different cultural differences, and bring together stakeholders from different professions, as what previously claimed here. It's not only legal field, it's experts from various fields. It's ethics, it's politics, it's policy, it's also engineering. People who would understand and come together to the forum and develop and ensure development and encourage development of practices for ethical framework that would thereafter encourage big data use for public and social good. Thank you.
Thank you very much. One of the things that the framework that we've worked on is tried to take into consideration is this concept of reticence risk. And reticence risk is where an organization with data understands the purpose for that use and the public benefit of it, but can't work their way through the regulatory issues related to that data. And part of the purpose of the framework is to help organizations understand how, when it's appropriate to provide data, when it's not, the type of safeguards or mitigations that would make that useful. And as we think about organizations,